The cold came down off the ridge like something with intent. I felt it first in my fingers, the left hand, always the left, where the wool had worn thin at the knuckle, and then in my lungs, that particular sharpness that makes every breath a small decision. We were 4 miles out of Cutter's Bench by my reckoning, moving northeast along the floor of a narrow drainage, and the temperature had dropped a full 15 degrees since we'd left the settlement's last building behind. That building was a leaning feed store with a tar paper roof, and the man inside had told us, without looking up from his ledger, that the main trail north had been drifted shut since the second week of October. He didn't tell us that like a warning. He told us like a fact he had no further use for. So we were walking the rails. They ran ahead of us in a shallow curve, half swallowed by the snow. Two lines of iron catching no light in the gray mid-morning, emerging and disappearing as the drifts allowed. The ties beneath them were buried entirely in most places, and where they showed, they were black with old wet, the wood swollen and checked. You had to place your boots carefully, or you'd catch a toe and go down hard, and the packs we carried didn't allow for graceful recovery. Mine weighed somewhere near 40 pounds with the blankets rolled and lashed, the hand axe riding on the outside where I could reach it. The journal I kept wedged under the flap of the main canvas where it wouldn't take moisture. We didn't talk. The cold made talking expensive. My brother walked 6 feet ahead of me, setting the pace the way he always did. Steady, mechanical, the kind of stride that doesn't waste anything. He carried the rifle across his back, muzzle down, the sling crossing his chest. His hat was pulled low enough that I could only see his jaw and the set of his shoulders, and I read his thinking in those shoulders the way you learn to over years of watching. Right then they said, "Keep moving. Don't comment on the cold. Keep moving." The fog had settled into the drainage sometime after 9 and hadn't lifted. It wasn't the thick river fog you get in lower country. It was thin, high-altitude fog, more like the air itself had gone white, and it compressed distance until the rails ahead vanished after 30 yards, and the ridge walls on either side became suggestions. I was watching my footing when I saw it. Driven upright into a tie at the rail's edge, not fallen, not accidental, but hammered in deliberately, the head flush with the wood, a single spike, and wired to it, bent into a rough rectangle by someone's hands, a strip of rusted tin no bigger than a playing card. I crouched, brushed the snow off with my sleeve, stamped letters, still legible despite the rust. HSCR Co. I stood up and looked at the fog ahead of us, where the rails disappeared into white. HSCR Co. I said the letters out loud, quiet, mostly to myself. Halcyon and Summit Creek Railroad Company. That was the name I'd half heard at Cutter's Bench, spoken by a man warming his hands at the stove in the trading post the evening before we left. He'd said it the way people say the name of someone who died badly. Not with grief exactly, more with the particular care of a man who doesn't want to be associated with bad luck by speaking it too clearly. I'd been filling our canteens at the barrel in the corner and hadn't caught all of it. Something about a spur line, something about a tunnel. I caught up to my brother and told him what I remembered, which wasn't much. The company had run a narrow gauge spur up into the San Juan starting sometime in the early 70s. That much I was nearly sure of. The line was supposed to push through a pass into the upper drainages. Silver country, maybe, or timber, I couldn't say which. But it never made it. There'd been a collapse. A tunnel somewhere above us had come in, and men had died in it. 3 of them, I thought, though I wasn't certain of the number. After that, the money had left. The way money always leaves when the ground takes men. Fast, and without looking back. The company had gone bankrupt, and the line had been abandoned with the rails still down, and whatever was at the end of it still up there. My brother listened without turning his head. When I finished, he said nothing for a while, and we walked. The elevation was working on us. I could feel it in the back of my throat, a faint rawness, and in the way my legs felt slightly wrong, like the hinges had been tightened a quarter turn too far. The pack ties were buried now under 3 feet of consolidated pack snow, sometimes more. We were walking on a white shelf that happened to run straight, trusting the rails were still under it, feeling for the raised line of iron with the toe of a boot whenever the surface shifted. He stopped first. It was a post, wooden, square cut, planted at the rail's edge with a flat face turned toward the oncoming direction. The paint had weathered to a dull gray-black, and the wood had checked along the grain, but the number was still there, hand-lettered in a steady hand. 4. 4 miles from wherever the line had started. I looked at my brother. He was looking up the drainage where the fog pressed down against the snowfield, and the rails disappeared into it for the 100th time. A milepost meant a terminus. Someone had driven this stake to tell a crew how far they'd come, which meant they were going somewhere specific, somewhere with a purpose and a name. Whatever that was, it was still up there. We walked another half-mile by my count, pacing each step against the rail's known spacing, a habit I'd picked up somewhere between Cutter's Bench and the fog, before the line simply stopped. Not tapered, not damaged, just stopped. A timber bumper, squared and bolted and buried to its cross-brace in the snow, with the 2 rails butting flat against it, like they'd run out of argument. The iron was dark with rust above the snow line and gleaming where the wind had kept it scoured. I put my hand on the end of the left rail, cold enough to sting through my glove. My brother had already stepped past it. He was standing 6 feet beyond the bumper in snow that came to mid-thigh, not moving, looking at something I couldn't see from behind him. I stepped around the bumper and came up to his shoulder. The roofline was the only thing visible, just the peak of it, a dark triangle of split-shake shingles, maybe 18 feet of ridge running roughly east to west, pressing up through the snowpack like a fin through still water. The rest of the structure was gone, swallowed. The north and west faces had collected the prevailing weather, and the drift that covered them had compacted and crusted into something closer to ice than snow. I could see where the surface had a blue-gray sheen in the flat light, the kind that means wind-packed layers with melt and freeze cycles in between. 4 feet deep, maybe more, on those faces. The south side had less accumulation. The slope ran away from the wind there, and the drift thinned toward the eaves. I could make out a line where the wall met the foundation granite, a dark seam running just above the snow's surface. Maybe 2.5 feet buried on the south exposure. I counted the visible rafters. 3 pairs, probably more under the drift at the far end. Timber frame construction, the ridge beam heavy, which was why it hadn't collapsed. Whoever built it had built it to carry weight. My brother said nothing for a long time. Then, door? I looked. A door on the south wall would have been accessible, or close to it. But the door wasn't on the south wall. I walked the perimeter as best I could, post-holing through the consolidated snow on the downwind side, and confirmed what I already suspected. The entrance, the only entrance, a single frame. The hinges still visible as two dark rectangles where the ice had formed around the hardware, was set into the north wall. The north wall was a solid face of blue-gray drift, 4 feet of wind-packed snow with a 2-inch crust of refrozen ice over it, running the full 18 feet of the structure without interruption. We stood there, both of us breathing hard from the altitude and the walk. The house was right in front of us, and it was completely sealed. Caleb looked at the north wall for a long time without speaking. I knew what he was calculating. We had maybe 3 hours of useful light left, and the nearest thing resembling shelter below us was a rock outcropping. We'd passed a 1.5 miles back, a shallow overhang, no more than 4 feet deep, barely enough to keep the wind off a fire if the wind held its current direction, which it wouldn't. He turned around once and looked down the slope at the rail line threading back through the timber. Then he turned back. "We dig," he said. That was all. I pulled the hand axe from my belt loop and stepped up to the north wall. Up close, the ice was remarkable. Not white, but a deep blue-gray, translucent enough that I could see the darker mass of packed snow behind it, compressed into something almost like stone. I swung the axe blade into it at shoulder height. The impact traveled back up my arms and into my jaw. The ice didn't crack so much as report, a flat, percussive sound, less like breaking and more like a rifle shot muffled underwater. A wedge the size of my fist calved off and dropped into the snow at my boots. I swung again. Again. Caleb was beside me now, working with his hands, pulling the loosened chunks away from the wall and stacking them to the side. His bare fingers against the ice. I noticed he didn't wince, just worked, methodical and steady the way he always was when the task was clear. The crust was 2 inches thick across most of the face. Once through it, the material changed. Packed snow that had partially melted and refrozen through repeated cycles. Not as hard as the crust, but denser than anything a shovel would have handled easily. I used the axe to cut it in blocks, quarrying it out in sections roughly a foot square. Caleb pried each block free with both hands and dropped it behind us. Slow work. Cold work. My shoulders ached before we were 8 inches in. We went at it for what I estimated was close to 2 hours. The light shifted from white to amber and the temperature dropped another 5 degrees. I kept my focus on the wall directly in front of me, measuring progress in axe handles. 1 axe handle deep, then 2. The wind picked up off the ridge and threw fine crystals of surface snow against the back of my neck. At 4 feet in, my axe blade hit something that did not sound like ice or nagorkrister. It sounded like wood. I stopped. I pulled my hand back and pressed my palm flat against the surface of what I had uncovered. Boards. Vertical planks, fitted close together, slightly rough under my fingers. And in the center of them, at the height of my chest, a cast iron latch, cold enough to sting, still seated in its bracket. The door was latched from the inside. I pulled my hand back from the latch and looked at my brother. He looked at me. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The wind moved through the cut we'd made in the ice wall and made a low, channeled sound, almost deliberate, like something breathing. The latch was a simple bar mechanism, a rectangular iron tongue seated in a bracket, hinged at one end gravity held at the other. From the outside, a pull cord would have threaded through a small bore in the door and lifted it free. From the inside, a man simply pressed it up with his thumb. It was the oldest kind of latch there is, the kind you'd find on any timber structure in the mountains, the kind that needed no key and no lock and cost nothing to make. I said it out loud, working through it as I spoke. The cord was the answer. A man leaving by the front door would have pulled the cord from outside to release the latch, then let it fall shut behind him. But the cord was organic material, braided hemp or rawhide, and it had been 7 years. I looked at the borehole in the door face, a circle roughly the diameter of my little finger, packed with something dark and fibrous. The cord had rotted in place. The bar had settled by its own weight, which is the only direction gravity goes, into the closed position. The door had latched itself. My brother found the borehole at the same moment I did. He looked at me and said nothing, but something in his face changed. He put his shoulder against the door and pushed, and the bar lifted, and the door swung inward into the dark. The smell that came out was spruce resin and cold iron and dry wood. 7 years sealed against the weather. 7 years undisturbed. Not rot, not damp, just sealed, the way a jar seals. We had 1 candle left in the tinderbox. I lit it. The room was 18 by 24 feet, maybe, low-ceilinged, the rafters close above our heads. The candle threw a small circle of orange light, and I moved it slowly from left to right, naming what I saw. A cast-iron stove against the north wall, its door shut, its flue pipe still attached. A rope-frame bunk against the east wall with nothing on it. A workbench running the length of the south wall, and below the workbench, stacked from floor to surface in tight split lengths, a half-cord of spruce, still sound, still pale at the cut ends. On the workbench, a single tin lantern. 3 candles bundled with a strip of leather. And between the lantern and the candles, pressed flat against the wall as though set there with care, a leather-bound journal roughly 7 inches by 4, the cover darkened at the corners from years of handling. I did not touch it yet. Caleb set the lantern going with the second-to-last candle and hung it from a rafter nail above the workbench. The room opened up in the yellow light. I stood with the journal in both hands and did not open it right away. The way you don't open a letter you've been waiting a long time for. The cover was stiff. The binding cracked faintly when I pressed it back, not from damage but from cold and age and disuse. The first page had a name written in a careful, slanted hand, the kind of penmanship a man does when he means to be read. Eric Voss, surveyor, Halcyon and Summit Creek Railroad Company. October 1871. Below that, in smaller letters, Upper Pass Survey, winter stay. Caleb came and stood beside me. He didn't say anything. I turned the page. The writing was English, plain and close set, with numbers worked into nearly every entry. Voss was 31 years old that winter. Swedish, born in Uppsala, trained as a civil engineer, employed by Halcyon and Summit Creek to survey the Upper Pass route before the rail line was cut through, which meant he was here before the line existed, before the ties and iron, before any of it. He had built this house himself with 1 hired hand who left in September, and then he had stayed alone. I read aloud. November 3rd, temperature at dawn, 7 degrees by the pocket gauge. Stove draws cleanly. Have calculated firewood. At current burn rate of 1.5 armloads per 24 hours. The half cord will sustain heat through March if I do not let the fire drop below coals at night. I do not let it drop. Caleb made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite anything. I kept reading. Vass logged the temperature every morning. He logged the snowfall in inches, measured with a marked stick driven into a cleared patch of granite south of the house. He logged how long his food lasted and what he replaced it with. Ptarmigan snared near the tree line. Pine nuts cached by squirrels in a rock split he found 50 yards downslope. He was not writing for comfort. He was writing like a man building something with words, placing every fact where it would hold weight. On November 19th, 1871, he wrote, "Heard cracking above the north wall through the night. The rafter on the windward side is taking load unevenly. I have propped it with a section of spruce pole and will monitor. A man who ignores sounds in the night does not survive to hear the morning ones." That stopped me. I looked up at the north rafter above the stove. Even in the lantern light, I could see the bow in it, the long, slow curve of timber under years of accumulated snow. Caleb looked up at the same time. Neither of us spoke. I turned back to the journal and found the page for December. The December pages were shorter. Voss had stopped explaining himself by then and was writing in lists. Wind speed estimated by the sound it made against the north wall. Wood burned per day measured in arm lengths of split spruce. The exact time the stove needed reloading to hold temperature through the night. But near the back of the journal, between a page of supply calculations and the final entries, he had folded in a loose sheet. Heavy paper, browned at the creases. My brother unfolded it carefully, the way you handle something that has been waiting a long time to be touched. It was a map, pencil lines, firm and deliberate, the hand of a man who drew surveyor's sketches for a living. The house was marked with a small square at the top. A compass rose beside it, north toward the page's edge. From the house, a dotted line ran southeast, and at its end, Vass had drawn a rough oval and written 2 words, Spring Cave. Below that, in the same precise hand, 340 yards southeast, rock above freezing year-round. Water runs even in February. Shelter from north blow without burning wood. My brother studied it for a long time. Then he folded it, tucked it inside his coat, and stood up. He took the rifle and went out without a word. I knew what he was doing. I also knew what I needed to do. The stove was cold iron. The firebox held ash and a few half-burned spruce ends from whoever had last lit it. Vass, 7 years ago, on a March morning when he finally walked out. I cleared the ash with a stick, found the damper, worked it until it moved. The spruce by the east wall was frozen on the outside but dry at the core. I split 2 pieces smaller with the axe, set kindling from a dry split's interface, and opened the tinderbox. 3 strikes. 4. The tinder caught on the 5th, and I fed it 1 shaving at a time, not rushing it, letting the flame decide when it was ready to take something larger. The kindling went. Then the first small piece of spruce. I held my hands near the open door of the firebox and waited. Outside, my brother was walking southeast through knee-deep snow with the compass rose in his head and 340 yards in front of him. I could not see him from the window. The glass was too fogged, but I thought about his route. Down off the granite shelf, through the scrub spruce at the tree line's edge, angling away from the wind, finding the rock face Vass had found 7 years before him, pressing a hand to the stone to feel whether it was cold all the way through or whether somewhere underneath, water was still moving. I added a full-length piece of spruce to the firebox. The stove began to tick. The door opened before I heard his boots, just the cold pushing in ahead of him. That particular wall of outside air that hits different when a room has finally gone warm. He stopped in the doorway, long enough to look at the stove, at the orange line showing through the firebox seam, and something in his face loosened. He pulled the door shut behind him and stood there dripping melt from his coat sleeves. The cave was there, exactly where the map said, 340 yards southeast, tucked into a granite fold low enough that the prevailing wind screamed across its face without catching it. A spring inside, not frozen, moving slow but moving. The stone floor dry. Room enough for 2 men to sleep out of the wind, he said, with gear piled against the back wall. He'd wedged a broken branch across the entrance as a marker. We could use it for water. We could use it as a fallback if the house failed us. I didn't say anything to that last part then. I should have. We ate salt pork warmed on the stovetop, the fat running clear and clean off the iron. We hung our socks from the bunk frame. Outside, the wind was high and specific. Not a roar, but a sustained pitch. The kind that makes you aware of every board and joint between you and it. The house held. The stove ticked and breathed. I'd lit one of Voss's 3 candles and set it on the workbench, and I lay in the bunk with the journal open across my chest and read while my brother slept beside me. Vass wrote carefully. His English had a formality to it, a considered quality. A man translating his thoughts one step further than native speakers do. He'd noted temperatures by feel since he had no instrument. He'd noted wind direction by watching where the snow built on the windowsill. And near the back of the journal, in entries from February of 1872, he'd written about the rafters. North wall rafter and west wall rafter both showing stress, he wrote. I do not know if the structure will hold another season under similar load. A man with timber in 2 weeks might repair it. A man without those things should be careful. I read that twice. I got up without waking my brother, or thought I hadn't, and held the candle up toward the ceiling. The north rafter ran the full length of the house, and I could see it from below, a crack, dark against the pale wood, running its length from the ridge to the plate. Not new, not old either. My brother was already awake. He stood on the bunk without a word, reached up and pressed his palm flat against the wood. In the candlelight, I watched the rafter flex, just slightly, just once, under the weight of everything above us. He didn't say we needed to fix it. He didn't ask me whether I thought we could. He just looked at the crack for a long time, pressed his palm against it once more, and stepped down off the bunk. By morning, we had a plan. The first spruce came down that same day, before noon. It stood 40 yards southeast of the house, 16 inches across at the base, and it took us the better part of 2 hours, trading the axe back and forth, warming our hands in our armpits between sets of blows, reading the lean wrong twice before we got it right. It fell north when we wanted east, and we had to drag it 18 yards through knee-deep snow to reach a patch of flat granite where we could work it. My shoulders hurt before we'd split a single length. The splitting was slower than the felling. Green spruce doesn't want to come apart clean. It stringed and grabbed the blade and had to be pried open with a wedge we improvised from a knot-free offcut. My brother drove the wedge with the rifle stock, reversed, butt end down, careful with it, and I pulled the halves apart by hand when they would come. We got 4 usable rafter lengths from the first tree. We needed 6. The second spruce was 63 yards out, smaller, 11 inches, and drier, which helped. It split cleaner, but gave us shorter stock, and my brother had to sister the pieces end to end on the weaker of the 2 rafters. He measured nothing. He'd sight down a length with one eye closed, hold it against the original, trim a half-inch with the axe, try again. It took him 4 attempts to get the fit he wanted on the north rafter. He didn't rush any of them. The spikes we pulled from a section of rail line 80 yards back toward the valley. The ties there had heaved, and the spikes had worked loose. We got 11 good ones with nothing but the axe head used as a lever. Not enough for every joint, so he chose where they went and made the rest with tree nails. Green spruce pins driven into bored holes I made with a nail heated in the stove. It is not elegant work. It is the kind of work that holds. We finished the north rafter on the 3rd day and the west on the 4th, with daylight to spare. When it was done, my brother climbed up through the gap in the roof line we'd worked through and stood in the cold air above the ridge line for a moment, looking at something I couldn't see from below. He came back down without explaining it, but he brought snow on his shoulders and a look on his face I recognized, the look of a man who has decided something and is satisfied with it. The 5th morning came in clear and still, the kind of cold that has no wind in it, just wait. I woke before Caleb and lay a moment in the bunk listening to the house. It made no sound. That was the thing. For the first time since we'd broken through the door, it made no sound at all. No creak from the north rafter, no settling complaint from the ridge, just the pop of the stove, which I had fed at 3 in the morning and which still held coals. I got up and put my hand flat against the east wall. Solid. I did the same to the north wall and felt nothing move under my palm. No shiver, no give. The work had held. My brother was up within the hour. He didn't say anything about the quiet either, but I watched him tilt his head slightly when he stood, the way a man does when he's listening for something he hopes not to hear. He didn't hear it. He poured water from the tin pot into both cups and handed me mine, and we drank standing up by the stove, the way we always do when something has been decided. After breakfast, he took the hand axe and went to the door. I followed him out into the cold. The lintel above the door frame was weathered spruce, gray and close-grained, and he ran his thumb along it first the way he always does before he cuts anything, feeling the wood, reading it. Then he stopped. He leaned in close. There in the grain, shallow enough that I'd walked under it a dozen times without seeing it, were letters already there. Faint. Deliberate. EVAS, 1871. He looked at me. I looked at him. Then he set the axe and cut beside it, not over it, below and to the right, giving Vass his own space the way you'd give a man room at a fire. The axe strokes were slow and clean. Caleb and Jesse Morrow, 1878. 7 years between the 2 names. 7 years, and a man neither of us ever met had left us dry wood, a working stove, a map to water, and every piece of knowledge he'd earned the hard way, sealed up and waiting like it was nothing, like it was just what you do. I think that's what I want you to understand, if you've stayed with us this long. The house wasn't abandoned. It was left. There's a difference. A man walked out of here in the spring of 1872 and closed the door behind him knowing he would not come back, and he left it ready anyway, for someone cold enough to need it, someone he would never meet, and didn't need to. That's its own kind of brotherhood. Not blood, not even name. Just one man's care reaching forward through years of silence to find whoever was willing to dig down to the door. The mountains keep those things. You only have to be willing to look.